the faster you can say I don't know, the better your projects and your experience will be. That's always been the AV person's struggle, that we don't actually say I don't know something. We're always trying to learn. When it comes to these kind of things, just raise your hand and say, I don't know. Give it to somebody who knows this stuff. Just pass it on.
Well, you got me. By all accounts, it doesn't make sense.
Oh well, back to business.
Hacking AV systems and the value of industry certifications, all that and more on this episode of AV Week. This is AV Week, episode 659, recorded Friday, April 5th, 2024. Sandboxing AV. This is AV Week, your weekly wrap-up of the biggest AV news and information we have gathered this week. My name is Tim Albright. I am your host. With us to discuss the news and information, first and foremost, Kelly Teal from SSR. Welcome, ma'am.
Thank you. And as always and forever, thank you for having me on.
Absolutely. You're awesome. Also with us is Christy Mitchell from Liberty AV. Welcome, ma'am.
Hi, everybody. Twice in 1 week, Tim. So good to be able to, I just feel so fortunate to see your old/new haircut twice in 1 week.
Okay, so the haircut is old, but anyhow. And if you didn't catch it, Christy and our buddy Erica Carroll, we did a special with them on the program they did with Rosie Riveters in Denver, actually Aurora Public School, so you need to check that out. And last but not least, a long-lost friend who has finally graced us with his presence, Frank Paticala from Dante. Welcome, sir.
This is not true.
Runs away from me at trade shows.
I had a sign ready that said, I'm sorry, Tim, please call me. So that's what really happened. Tim stopped calling me.
There's 3 versions of the truth, right?
There's
Yours,
15 versions of this truth.
It's
all right
in the middle.
First story, hacking Linux. Holy cow. A widely used open source library called XZ Utils, present in major Linux distributions, was found to contain a sophisticated backdoor that allows remote attackers to execute arbitrary code and gain complete control over vulnerable systems. The malicious code was deliberately introduced by a project maintainer named Jai-Dan, who built credibility over a span of 2 years before inserting the backdoor. Experts believe this to be a complex state-sponsored operation with multi-year planning, highlighting the reliance on open-source software and the potential consequences of such a breach. The incident emphasizes the need for organizations to adopt tools and processes to identify signs of tampering and malicious features within both open-source and commercial code used in their development pipeline. Mr. Paticala, we are going to start with you on this. Linux, for me, right? Linux was always like the gold standard. You can't hack it because it's just it's complicated and all that. And not that this is the first time that something in Linux has been hacked, but this was a pretty significant one. When we look at this, and one of the lines of the story talked about the need to implement these processes on both commercial code. That's what caught my ear, because everything we do in AV is got some kind of code, right? It is a software first industry anymore. What are the best practices for implementing AV security?
In an instance like this, obviously sandboxing is the first step to most of these things. And to bring a little highlight to it, and most of it is mentioned in the article, the supposed attacker started a GitHub repository 3 years ago, right? So it's not like it was sudden. It's not an attack. So I'd like to shift focus on our perspectives on security a lot of times, because we assume that an exploit is instantaneous. The fact that this was built over 3 years, which means they kept releasing updates and you added the updates, the only reason why this didn't become worse is because a Microsoft developer caught this. Because what it did, and to break it down into a little bit of the technical aspects of it, is that it gave a backdoor, an SSH, into any user that implemented this utility code. And XZ is actually a very popular compression tool, something like the Windows equivalent would be like zipping your file. So it's used as a compression thing. So a couple of things, right? It's widespread. It's commonly used software. We have the advantage that a lot of our software platforms are still very much manufacturer dependent. So it's not like you can go on to GitHub and download, like, say, a specific manufacturer's code. There would be implementations of it, but there's still a lot of lockdown systems. But we are largely, with the development of our enhanced networks, going away from these tight, lockdown, walled garden kind of things. We want open source. We want things to be utilitarian. We want people to be able to access this. So GitHub and all these things are going to be more commonplace. There's nothing that we need to do new. We just need to follow the practices that the industries before us did with their software systems. Proper sandboxing, proper implementation of processes, documentation. Very simple stuff, but it's just that we need to do it.
That seems simple, right? And I want to get Kelly and Christy on this as well. But really quickly, the AV industry has not been known to adopt best practices from other industries. We have a history.
There it is.
We have a history of trying to home roll it ourselves.
Yes.
So how the heck do we get the entire? Well, and I mean the manufacturers to say, "Hey guys, here's a bunch of standards over here. You might want to consider them."
My new agenda with doing podcasts is to be the pro AV person in every conversation. And I'm going to say that we underestimate how much of security AV people already do. It's just that we've grown accustomed to just bashing the AV systems. I think this conversation 10 years ago, yes, for sure, like we didn't know best practices. The programmers of today do have a solid IT background. Our companies are very much network compliant. As manufacturers, when we come in and we have those conversations about APIs or programming interfaces, one of the first questions every AV designer asks us is, do you have a document that shows us the best practices? Which shows that they don't know the best practices, but they're asking us, do you know what that is? Which has prompted us to come up with these single pagers and information sheets that can be given to these people. So there is thought. I don't know how much that has infiltrated the entirety of the AV industry. So maybe if you look at the top 50 AV companies, I'm sure there's a process in place, but this needs to be more commonplace. I think we have it. It's just that how much of that is out in public, how much of that is in terms of awareness, that's where, these kind of shows come into play. I mean, people listening to this should understand that if you don't have a process for managing your software, the software development lifecycle, SDLC, which is commonly used in software terms, needs to become a part of our industry too. Just adopt it, mold it to what works with your ecosystem, and you should be good to go. I wasn't alarmed when I saw this.
Okay.
I mean, and again, I'm a security person, so I'm not alarmed by this any of the time because I'm almost expecting this to happen. I believe that's the right mindset. We should expect this to happen every other day. This is going to be commonplace. We're going to hear more exploits. It's not going to get better.
One of the things that I had written down in my notes for discussion on this topic is, whose job is it? And I feel like in AV, we circle this conversation back to, AV and IT all the time. I have a women's group in Colorado Women in AV and IT, and we are trying to make sure that we get more IT people into our women's group. And if you branch that back out into what we're talking about with manufacturing, with integration, with all the different spokes of the wheel that make up AV, it is a common statement that this is AV's job and this is IT's job. Okay, well, I did my part. I'm in AV. I did my part. Okay, well, we're finished now. Now it's IT's job. And to merge those two categories together is, again, what we're trying to do, and it should be so incredibly important. So we're not having to ask, whose job is it? To go back to the fact that this was an eloquent process, these things happen 2-3 years in advance. And that's always been the case, right? This is not the hackers of 1999. They're sophisticated. They know what they're doing. They know it is a long-term process in order to infiltrate these systems. And if we're already 3 years behind figuring out whose job it is in order to protect ourselves and be proactive instead of reactive against these kinds of attacks, we're 20 years behind, in my opinion. So I think, in terms of where this conversation is now, I'm thankful for what Frank said personally, because it is such a positive glass half full approach to what I would have expected, at least from my perspective, to be, okay, well, we're already behind, right? That's what I just said. So it's nice to see someone who has the background and the education and the experience saying we are making positive steps forward. But my favorite phrase is that we need to get there yesterday, right? And how do we do that? We need to remove ego in certain cases within AV and start to have these conversations with IT and cybersecurity folks and say, look, it's all of our jobs, because at the end of the day, when the poo-poo hits the fan, somebody's going to get blamed for it. And then whose job will it be then? All of ours to fix it.
Yeah, absolutely.
The faster you can say I don't know, the better your projects and your experience will be. That's always been the AV person's struggle, that we don't actually say I don't know something. We're always trying to learn. When it comes to these kind of things, just raise your hand and say, I don't know, give it to somebody who knows this stuff. Just pass it on.
And you saying that they're asking for best practices makes me so happy. That means that, again, we're shifting from I know how to do it, or I'll tinker, or I'll figure it out, because we've been a tinkering type of industry, to let's get serious. Let's get serious about who we are. We're not,
Completely agreed.
We're not rolling up under the people that, supply the cups and the paper towels to every building now. We're a bona fide industry. Let's get serious.
Kelly, from your perspective, both from working with clients directly and users directly, how do we implement this, and how do we get it to them in such a way that they take the implementation of security seriously?
Well, I don't think it's a lack of them not taking, I don't think it's them not taking it seriously and it's a lack of awareness, because I know everyone's aware. I mean, everything's hackable now. To prevent backdoors from sidestepping authentication, which we actually had that recently. Someone was just guessing passwords, and that was sending an authentication code to people's phones, and they obviously, none of them got in, because we have really good processes in place which fall under best practices, and that's really what it comes down to. And I agree with Christy, we're behind. I mean, when we made this transition from being AV only people to now we're integrated with IT, there was a whole separate set of knowledge base there that a lot of people who didn't already have it had to learn it or didn't. I think it's been a big transition for a lot of people. And when we're talking best practices now, we're not just talking just best practices as it pertains to AV. We're talking also cybersecurity. We're talking network. That includes regular updates, strong authentication, network segmentation, making sure you have encryption and disable default accounts and monitor network traffic. I mean, that is, I think, falls outside of the scope of what a lot of people are used to in the AV world. In fact, where I'm at now, I actually moved a little bit out of the AV role, and now I'm doing more security and network implementation, because it was something that, like Christy said, the egos need to be let go. It was hard to work around that, and it was hard to try and get people to agree these are best practices, and then say, no, that's not our responsibility to determine that. Even something down to security awareness training would help. And I know a lot of places have that now, and they offer that as part of their product, but it really comes down to following those best practices, feeling confident that you can be in the AV industry and also implement these security measures so that these things don't happen. Because I think it's happening outside of the AV industry all the time too. I mean, it's everywhere. I mean, like I said before, my mortgage company was down for a month. They got hacked. Yeah. And they claim they had the best security implementations in place, and it come to find out they didn't. There was a weak point. And they didn't follow best practices, and I don't know who was responsible for that. But right. I think it comes down to that.
But it wasn't their job.
Right. It wasn't their job. It was someone else. And that's what they did. They deflected. They sent out a letter saying due to I think there was a weakness in their security protocol is what they called it. They passed the buck. It was somebody else's responsibility.
But the coolest part about this, and I'll just throw this out there, in security, risk transference is actually an accepted way of mitigating these things, so you can actually pass it on to someone. So the only way you can really do that is if you have the proper documentation to say, hey, I did my part. I passed it on to someone. All the more reason that we got to cover our tracks and our bases as we're doing these things. It's like AV has traditionally operated on this demarc point of, all right, from this point on, it's no longer AV. I don't think that exists anymore. I mean, we should be able to be brought into the conversation and be a part of the conversation, whatever the life cycle of it is, right? 2 years from now, on something you implemented, your conference room may get hacked. You can't be like, I finished the install 2 years ago, so it's not on me. It is on you if there is a piece of the install that you still own in terms of code or service or something. So it is always you. You've got to be part of it.
Regular audits have to happen. I mean, their vulnerabilities and weaknesses that could be exploited to create those backdoors can happen at any point. There has to be regular audits that you have to do a regular audit or assessment of that system to identify and remediate any of those vulnerabilities. So that's something else, is trying to get someone to admit that they need to stay on top of that. Well, again, it's not my job. That's really what it comes down to, Tim, is we need to get people on the same page about where the responsibility lies. And we are behind and we're catching up, but yeah, we'll get there.
Well, it's top line, right? It can be a middle out approach. It could be top line, where we're talking about all the different counterparts that make up AV. Well, we've got manufacturer level. That's what Frank was talking about manufacturers making sure that they have best practices added in to deliver to people like Kelly and consulting and their integrator partnerships, right? So then our integrators need to be able to say, hey, we installed this if they do the installations, and when the end user goes back, there should be a level of support from manufacturer to integrator if something goes wrong. We should all be responsible, and it should all be our job.
Our job, absolutely. All right. Second story we're going to do is from our friend Alicia Hendley in Commercial Integrator. Alicia works for Sennheiser. Alicia tells the story of Sam Young, a successful AV integrator who transitioned from IT, Batakala, to AV and obtained the CTS-D certification. Young's approach to system design, which involves active listening, simplicity, and collaboration, has been instrumental in their success. The article emphasizes the importance of mentorship, continuous learning, and the support of professional associations like AVIXA, in this case, in fostering personal and professional growth within the AV industry, while also encouraging individuals from diverse backgrounds to pursue careers in this field. Christy, we're going to start with you on this. What is the value, both personally as well as professionally, of industry credentials?
Well, you're also speaking to, I love how you came to me first. You're speaking to the one probably on the podcast with zero industry education focused credentials, which is interesting, right? I don't have a CTS. I don't have a CTS-D. Shout out to Kelly, which we're going to talk about here in a minute, who's going after her RCDD. But I don't have any of these industry credentials. And if I were to tell this story, I have zero regrets in my life. You have to live that way. Otherwise, you're just, you're looking backward instead of forward. But I would rather tell the story of, I backed into the industry and I didn't know what I was doing. And now I'm trying to play catch up. And so how do I do that while also trying to learn everything else that I have to do in order to do my everyday job? So it would be a story for me to tell where if I had the opportunity, I would have loved from, grades 9 through 12 to have had an opportunity for somebody to come into my high school and say, hey, this is a career path for me. This is an opportunity. Do you like to make things look good and sound good for a living? Hey, why don't we start you down a process here where you can get these training, these courses, this education, this vocational knowledge available to you now, and put me directly into an organization right out of high school. And it's one of the things that Tim and I were discussing with Erica Carroll a couple of days ago, which is, all of these opportunities are out here for young people that they just don't know that exist, because our industry is inherently, who do you know 6 degrees from one to the next. And so, in a different world now, I might surprise you in the next couple of years. You never know. And when that day happens, I cannot wait to come on this podcast and say, hey, guess what? Guess what I learned? Guess what test I took and I passed the first time? Hopefully. Yeah. But, and I also think it's not just about having a CTS certification. Again, that is a wonderful thing that we provide within AVIXA, but there are so many other manufacturer trainings, things that I want to learn now as a manufacturer. I want to study audio. How do I do that?
Frank.
I want to learn about live recording and sound. How do I do that? I want to learn, I want to learn about film production and how one thing connects to the next without having to be on the job learning from my customers. How do I do that? So it's not just the fact that we have these tools available to us. And I want to say kudos to Sam Young for being a guy who went from IT to AV. And I would love to pick his brain on his story as to how that happened and what, even more about his experience. But, what else can we do and how can we make this knowledge available and make it a certifiable program outside of a CTS? Like, what does that look like?
Kelly, Christy mentioned your RCCD. So let's talk about industry certification and what you're doing and why you're doing it.
So if you had asked me this a few years ago, I was very biased because the reason I got into the industry was I fell into it accidentally. So I was going to college for a completely different major. And I grew up building computers. So I knew I was going to work in technology. And I got all of my experience from being on site and starting at 18 years old and working at a full-time technology firm at 18 years old and just stuck with it. However, there are people who don't get that opportunity or they start much later. And if you'd asked me, I thought CTS was just alphabet soup behind a name. And I thought some of the most knowledgeable people were, people who didn't hold credentials. However, again, once I moved into the senior consultant role, to me, it became more of I don't need to go and get that to, maybe I do need to validate my skills and knowledge, just for industry credentials serving as as tangible evidence that, an individual does possess the necessary skills and knowledge required to perform specific tasks. So there's a little bit of a political reason for getting it, but there's also, things that you may not know, things that you've never come across, even if you've been doing this for 15 years, that it's like good to know. And, it not only that, but internally, it's just, advancement opportunities and global recognition, professional development. I mean, I've never gotten, for instance, I know this isn't a credential, but more of an achievement, but I've never gotten 40 under 40. Would I like to get it at some point? Yeah. Does it mean I don't know what I'm doing? No. Same with credentials. It doesn't mean you don't know what you're doing. It's just something that it's a validation just to ensure and let people know that you do know what you're doing. However, you've got that extra set of knowledge that from an industry standpoint, there's things that now that you may not have known before, ever had to deal with. And that's more, my shift has become more of it'd be really nice to have it. And I started chasing the RCDD because I started working on, there's two reasons for that. One, I went from being kind of an AV only expert to now I'm back into more of a hybrid role where I'm doing AV security, telecom infrastructure, RTLS, clock systems. So there's things that now that I've gone from being an AV expert for a number of years, I want to make sure that my knowledge is up to date. I want to make sure that there's things that I know and that I can perform, and provide, a design that for a client, it's just a stellar design. And I used every bit of piece of information that I had because I got the RCDD and I have the latest information downloaded now. So that's kind of how I see it. I did have a shift in how I felt about certifications, and now I'm fully on board for them. I don't think they're bad. They're expensive, but
Well, I think you're bringing up such a great point, which is we're drilling down into the certifications, and Frank, I promise I'll let you, I just have to say this. Like, we're doing chicken or the egg when it comes to certifications because we're not proving a validity and a necessity behind them. They're options for people. And so if we're deciding, or we're viewing this, even just with the four of us on this podcast today, as something that is an option and not something that is necessary, then when it comes to being hired and hireable, what career advancement opportunities do you indeed have because you have the CTS, because you have the CTS-D, because you have this manufacturer level cert? What we need to take it serious, but how?
So, Frank, I want you to comment on that, but also take a look at not just the CTS or the CEDIA certification, Big C, but you also got the CCNA, which is technically a manufacturer, right?
Yep.
It's a Cisco certification, but it's a highly coveted one.
Yep.
It's a pain in the butt, and to Kelly's point, it's also expensive. You've got the RCDD. You've got several. Technically, you can be AIA certified, right? So what is the value of certifications generically, regardless of where it comes from, for the industry?
So I'll give you two perspectives. One is my personal perspective on certifications, right? And that's personal. I don't know how many people relate to that. I really do enjoy learning, right? And I know everybody says that, but it is truly something that calms me. If I'm learning something, and trust me, I have done courses on everything from knife sharpening all the way to the most random things. I like learning things. And it's just, so I find a certification a preset way of learning something. It's already there. Does it validate, or does it give you the skill sets to take on a role in which that particular certification applies to? Maybe, maybe not, right? When I passed my CCNA, I passed it for the first time when I was 17 years old. And I did it because I loved computers. I didn't go into computer related stuff after that. And I kept renewing it all these years because I liked the networking part of things. Did it help me? It absolutely did. So when I had my first conversations, so I did that. I've tangentially, I just went into cybersecurity, which all seemed like, different paths. But my first AV job, when I got into it, the fact that I had that IT background was the conversation starter. So I got my foot in the door because of the certifications. Nobody was asking me, hey, you have a CCNA. Do you actually know how to do a network? Yes, I did. But that wasn't the point of the certification, is that I did pass an exam that was set by a manufacturer or an industry body that gave me said skills, right? On-the-job training will always be the number one way where people learn and actually learn how to implement skills. So this is my second perspective on it, right? Skills are always acquired at your job. There's no question about it. Some of the best IT professionals have 0 certifications. Some of the best AV professionals have 0 certifications. You don't need a...
Oh, thank God.
No, I completely agree with that.
Christy, I didn't have any for many years. I'll tell you that.
Absolutely. There's no need to have a certification to prove you know that. But we are, in a very competitive market. We're also talking to not just the industry experienced professionals. We're also talking to people who are coming new. So if you're out of high school and you're looking to get into the industry, what do you tell them? Hey, why don't you network with 300 people you don't know and get those connections going? Or is it easier to say, hey, jump onto VIXA, get a CTS, and then when you start the conversation, you can say, I have a CTS. So at least there's a benchmark, and that's how certifications need to be seen. Now, there are different levels of certifications. So RCDD, I consider that an advanced certification. Anything that you need months of training and months of learning in order to pass, that's not an entry-level certification. There is definite advantages to having that. Employers need to recognize people who get those certifications. They need to be valued in every sense in terms of HR there is, because these are difficult things to get. So when somebody goes to that level, respect it, give them the right pay, everything. They deserve that, right? But that's how you need to see it. There are steps to certifications. Go for the higher ones if that's really what you want to do. But the entry-level certs are all there to kind of give us that opportunity to get into an industry.
Makes sense. All right. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Kelly Teal from SSR and future RCTD. How do people connect with you?
LinkedIn and only LinkedIn.
Christy, how do people get a hold of you?
LinkedIn, Christy Mitchell. It's CHRISTIE, and then MITCHELL. and shouldn't be too hard to find. I'm pretty active on there.
All right. Mr. Patakala, how do people connect with you?
Frank Patakawa on all the socials. Do a lot of LinkedIn these days, so you can reach me there.
And I should mention this. Frank is also an award-winning Frank Patakala with the Dante and the Dante
Woo!
shorts. So he won AVNation's Reader's Choice Awards this year and last year, actually. So
It did. Was a highlight of my career.
whatever. All right. For me, for Tim Albright, don't follow me on anything, but go by the website if you would, please, avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. You'll find the special we did with Christy sometime this week, and Mitchell's in the background, and I forgot when I told him to do it. So I think Tuesday or Thursday, but go by there, as well as a host of others. EdTech is a brand new episode out, State of Control and Women in AV. Also, you can check out our coverage of Enterprise Connect. We were in Orlando a couple weeks ago, and all of those videos should be up on the website as well. So all that and more at avnation.tv. That's avnation.tv. Thanks so much for listening. Thank you so much for watching. That's all the time we have for AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
This is AV.
This
is AV Nation.
This is AV Nation.